December 25th, 1991. Mikhail Gorbachev sits alone in his office. He picks up a pen, and with one signature, the largest country on Earth ceases to exist. The Soviet Union is dead. 300 million people wake up the next morning with no country, no system, no identity, their savings gone overnight, their factories suddenly ownerless, their future up for grabs, and in 7 different apartments across Moscow. 7 men are already making phone calls. They are not politicians, they are not generals, they are not heroes, they are businessmen, and they are about to commit the greatest theft in the history of human civilization. To understand how Russia was stolen, you first need to understand what Russia was. For 70 years, the Soviet Union operated on one simple principle. The state owns everything, your factory, your apartment, your salary, your future. There was no stock market, no private business, no billionaires. If you tried to start a private company, you went to prison. If you tried to move money out of the country, you disappeared. This was a system built on total control. And for decades, it worked. But systems built on fear have one fatal weakness. The moment the fear disappears, everything collapses. By 1989, the fear was gone. And by 1991, so was the Soviet Union. Now imagine, you are a young, ambitious, brilliant man in Moscow. You grew up with nothing. The state told you what to study, where to work, how much to earn. And suddenly, overnight, all the rules are gone. What do? If you are Boris Berezovsky, you build a car dealership and turn it into a billion-dollar empire in 36 months. If you are Mikhail Khodorkovsky, you open a bank and become Russia's richest man before the age of 35. If you are Roman Abramovich, you start trading oil from a one-room office and end up owning Chelsea Football Club. But here is the question nobody asks. How? How does a country go from 0 billionaires to 7 men owning half the nation in just 5 years? The answer is not ambition. The answer is not intelligence. The answer is one word: privatization. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the new Russian government faced an impossible problem. They had inherited 170,000 state-owned companies, oil fields, steel plants, media empires, airlines, banks, mines, stretching across 11 time zones, and absolutely no idea what to do with them. The man Boris Yeltsin trusted with this impossible problem was a 35-year-old economist named Anatoly Chubais. Chubais had a plan. He called it voucher privatization. The idea sounded beautiful, democratic, fair. Every single Russian citizen, all 148 million of them, would receive a voucher worth 10,000 rubles. They could use this voucher to buy shares in any company they wanted. Factories, banks, oil fields. Suddenly, the people would own Russia. It was the most idealistic economic experiment in modern history. And it was over before it even began. The problem was simple. The average Russian had no idea what a share was, what a company was worth, which industries would survive. They were hungry. Their savings had been wiped out by inflation, and someone was offering them actual cash for those confusing pieces of paper. So they sold one voucher, worth a theoretical share in Russia's entire industrial empire, sold for a bottle of vodka, a pair of shoes, 2 weeks of groceries. And who was buying? 7 men, with connections, with cash, with the most important resource of all, information. They knew which companies were valuable. They knew which oil fields were about to boom. They knew because they were connected directly to the Kremlin. Boris Berezovsky alone collected enough vouchers to take control of Russia's largest car manufacturer, Avtovaz, a company that employed 700,000 people, built on 70 years of Soviet investment. acquired by one man for almost nothing. But even this was not the real theft. The real theft hadn't happened yet, because in 1995, someone had an idea so audacious, so breathtaking in its corruption, that even the oligarchs themselves couldn't believe it was being offered to them. It was called loans for shares. 1995. Boris Yeltsin's government is completely broke. Russia owes billions. The economy is in free fall, and an election is coming. Yeltsin needs money, and he needs it now. The oligarchs see their moment. Vladimir Potanin, one of the seven, walks into the Kremlin with a proposal. He says, "We will lend the Russian government money. In exchange, you give us temporary control of your biggest state companies as collateral. If you can't pay us back, we keep the companies." The government agrees. Now here is what happens next. Pay very close attention, because this is where the theft becomes almost beautiful in its evil genius. The oligarchs lend the government money. Then, they themselves run the auctions that decide who gets the companies. They are both the buyer and the auctioneer. Norilsk Nickel, the largest nickel and palladium producer on Earth, worth an estimated $20 billion, sold for $170 million. Yukos Oil, sitting on the largest private oil reserves in the world, sold for $309 million. Sibneft Oil, sold to Roman Abramovich for $100 million. It would later be worth $13 billion. In less than 18 months, Russia's entire industrial heart had been transferred from 148 million people to 7 men. Not through war, not through revolution, through paperwork. The greatest heist in human history was committed with a pen. Berezovsky controls Russia's largest TV channel. Gusinsky owns newspapers and radio stations. Potanin controls metals that supply half the world. Khodorkovsky pumps more oil than most OPEC nations. Abramovich sits on a personal fortune larger than the GDP of 50 countries. They are not just rich. They are untouchable. They fund Yeltsin's election campaign. They control what Russians see on television. They decide which politicians rise, which ones fall. Russia is technically a democracy, but the 7 men in these rooms are the ones who decide what democracy means. Berezovsky once said openly in an interview that 7 bankers control 50% of the Russian economy. He didn't say it as a confession, he said it as a boast. This is what power looks like when it has no fear of consequences. But every empire has a weakness, and the weakness of the oligarchs was the same thing that made them powerful, their total dependence on whoever sat inside the Kremlin. In 1999, a former KGB officer nobody had ever heard of was appointed Prime Minister of Russia. His name was Vladimir Putin. The oligarchs were not worried. They had handled politicians before. They thought Putin was just another man they could control. They were wrong. Putin understood something the oligarchs didn't. He understood that in Russia, real power was never about money. Real power was about fear, and he was very good at fear. Within months of taking power, Putin sent a message, not through a speech, not through a law, through a television station. Gusinsky, one of the 7, owned NTV, Russia's most independent news channel. A channel that openly criticized the Kremlin. In the summer of 2000, masked officers from the tax police raided NTV's offices. Gusinsky was arrested, held in prison for 3 days, then released. The message was clear. Your media belongs to me now. Gusinsky fled to Spain. He never returned. Then came Berezovsky, the man who had been perhaps the most powerful oligarch of all, the man who had helped engineer Putin's own rise to power. Putin turned on him within a year. Berezovsky fled to London. He gave interviews, he wrote articles, he called Putin a dictator. In 2013, He was found dead in his bathroom in his English mansion. The official verdict, suicide. Nobody believed it. But the most chilling story, the one that showed the world exactly what Putin was building, was the story of Mikhail Khodorkovsky. By 2003, Khodorkovsky was the richest man in Russia, worth over $15 billion. His oil company Yukos was the largest private company in the country. But Khodorkovsky had made a fatal mistake. He had started funding opposition political parties. He had started talking about democracy. He had started acting like a man who believed Russia's future should be decided by its people, not by the man in the Kremlin. On October 25, 2003, Khodorkovsky's private jet landed in Novosibirsk for a refueling stop. Armed officers stormed the plane. They dragged Russia's richest man off in handcuffs in front of his terrified staff. He was charged with fraud and tax evasion. The trial was a performance. Everyone in Russia knew it. He was sentenced to 9 years in prison. His company, Yukos, worth $40 billion, was systematically dismantled by the state and absorbed into Rosneft, the state oil company, controlled directly by Putin's inner circle. $40 billion, taken back, in broad daylight, legally. Khodorkovsky spent 10 years in a Siberian prison. When he was finally released in 2013, he immediately went into exile. The message Putin had sent to every remaining oligarch was simple: your money is yours only as long as I allow it. After Khodorkovsky, something shifted permanently in Russia. The remaining oligarchs fell into line immediately. Abramovich, who had built the closest relationship with Putin, survived. But he understood the new rules. He stayed out of politics. He spent his billions on football clubs and yachts and stayed very quiet about Russia. Potanin stayed. He kept his metals empire. He never once publicly disagreed with the Kremlin. The era of the oligarchs as independent power was over. Russia had not become a democracy after the fall of the Soviet Union. It had become something new, something the world didn't have a word for yet. A country where one man controlled the state, and the state controlled everything else, including the billionaires. The oligarchs had stolen Russia from the people, and then Putin had stolen it back from the oligarchs. Today, Russia's wealth is more concentrated than ever. The names have changed, the faces have changed, but the system is exactly the same. A small group of men, connected to power, controlling everything.